Welcome to the Hojo on Architecture podcast. The Origins of Architecture. Chapter 4. The First Walls. In the previous chapter, we explored how the emergence of agriculture transformed humanity's relationship with time, continuity, territory, and collective organization. We examined how cultivation encouraged permanence, storage, environmental management, and increasingly structured settlements. In this chapter, we move from cultivation to construction itself. The discussion shifts from the organization of agricultural life to the emergence of the first architectural systems through earth, stone, timber, and mud. Walls are often understood as simple structural elements. In contemporary architecture, they are usually discussed in terms of enclosure, load-bearing systems, spatial division, or material performance. Yet the earliest walls represented something much deeper than technical construction. They marked one of the first moments when humans began systematically separating interior from exterior, protected from unprotected, controlled from uncontrolled space. The wall, therefore, emerged not merely as a physical boundary, but as a cultural and psychological threshold. Before the emergence of constructed walls, protection depended heavily on natural environmental conditions. Humans relied on caves, rock formations, vegetation, elevation, and temporary shelters because these spaces already contained defensive qualities. However, as settlements grew increasingly permanent, natural protection alone proved insufficient. Agricultural continuity, storage systems, and collective life required more stable forms of enclosure. Architecture, therefore, began shifting from adaptation toward deliberate environmental production. This transformation changed the meaning of construction itself. Earlier shelters often relied on lightweight, temporary arrangements designed for flexibility and mobility. Permanent settlements, however, required structures capable of withstanding seasonal change, environmental pressures, and repeated use. Materials such as mud, earth, stone, timber, reeds, and eventually mud brick gradually became organized into more stable architectural systems. The importance of these materials extended beyond technical necessity. Early construction methods emerged directly from environmental conditions and locally available resources. Architecture at this stage was inseparable from geography because material selection depended not on abstract aesthetic preference, but on climate, terrain, vegetation, and accumulated environmental knowledge. Construction, therefore, functioned as a form of ecological negotiation between human needs and landscape conditions. This is why the first walls should also be understood as the beginnings of vernacular intelligence. Construction techniques developed gradually through observation, experimentation, repetition, and adaptation rather than formal theory. Walls were thickened in response to climate, openings shifted in response to environmental exposure, and materials were selected for durability and accessibility. Architecture emerged here not through individual authorship, but through collective environmental learning. The wall also transformed spatial experience itself. Once enclosed environments became increasingly stable, humans could begin to organize their interior lives more deliberately. Activities previously dependent on temporary arrangements acquired continuity within protected environments. Hearths became spatial anchors, storage spaces acquired permanence, and domestic routines became increasingly structured through enclosure. In this sense, walls did not simply divide space, they produced new forms of social organization. Interior space gradually became associated with familiarity, protection, routine, and identity, while exterior space retained stronger associations with uncertainty and environmental exposure. Architecture, therefore, began shaping psychological distinctions alongside physical ones. The settlement became not only inhabited, but internally organized. At the same time, walls also introduced new forms of social control. Boundaries regulate movement as much as they provide protection. Once settlements developed stronger forms of enclosure, distinctions between belonging and exclusion became increasingly visible. Architecture, therefore, became connected not only to safety and continuity, but also to territorial definition and collective authority. This relationship between walls and control remains deeply embedded within architectural history. Even the earliest enclosures reveal that architecture has always operated simultaneously as protection and regulation. The wall protects certain activities while restricting others. It creates security while also defining limits. From its earliest stages, architecture therefore participated in the spatial organization of human behavior. The emergence of walls also transformed the temporal dimension of architecture. Temporary shelters often prioritized immediate function over long-term endurance. Permanent walls, however, required maintenance, repair, and material continuity across time. Construction increasingly became an investment in future stability rather than immediate survival alone. architecture acquired durability as a cultural value. This durability contributed directly to the accumulation of social memory within settlements. Walls preserve traces of occupation because they remain physically present across generations. Repeated use gradually embeds memory into the architectural space itself. Settlements, therefore, began functioning not only as places of habitation but also as repositories of collective continuity. At the same time, construction remained highly experimental and adaptive. Early architectural systems were not yet standardized technologies but evolving responses to environmental and social conditions. Walls collapsed, materials deteriorated, techniques changed, and settlements continuously adapted through practical experience. Architectural knowledge emerged incrementally through repeated interaction between humans, materials, and climate. This process also reveals that the origins of architecture cannot be separated from material thinking. The first walls were not abstract design concepts imposed onto space, but direct negotiations with gravity, weather, temperature, moisture, and structural limitations. Construction forced humans to confront the physical behavior of matter itself. Architecture, therefore, emerged not only through spatial imagination, but through material understanding. Such developments gradually transformed settlements into increasingly coherent architectural environments. Individual shelters became connected through circulation systems, shared boundaries, and organized spatial relationships. The settlement no longer functioned merely as a collection of isolated structures, but as an interconnected spatial organism shaped through construction logic. The wall also introduced a new relationship between visibility and privacy. Once the enclosure stabilized the interior life, activities could become spatially separated from public exposure. Domestic life acquired a stronger internal definition, and distinctions between communal and private space became increasingly meaningful. Architecture, therefore, began to regulate not only movement, but also social visibility itself. This transformation contributed directly to the emergence of architectural permanence as a cultural idea. Buildings were no longer expected merely to provide temporary protection. They increasingly symbolized continuity, settlement stability, and collective investment in place. Construction became associated with permanence because architecture itself was gradually becoming tied to long-term social existence. Yet despite this increasing permanence, early walls remained deeply connected to environmental realities. Architecture had not yet become detached from climate, geography, or material limitation. The first walls emerged precisely because humans were learning how to negotiate these conditions more effectively through construction. In this sense, early architecture remained fundamentally ecological even as it became increasingly artificial. The first walls, therefore, represent far more than the emergence of structural enclosure. They mark a deeper transformation in how humans organize relationships between body, environment, territory, memory, and collective life. Construction became a way of stabilizing existence spatially. Architecture was no longer merely a shelter against the environment, it was becoming an active system for organizing civilization itself. In the next chapter, we will move from walls to domestic life. We will examine how houses gradually evolved beyond basic protection into structured environments shaped by routine, family organization, labor, and everyday experience. The discussion will shift from enclosure to habitation, from material permanence to domestic continuity, and from collective settlement to the intimate spatial rhythms of daily life. Because once humans learned to construct stable environments, the next transformation became inevitable, learning to live within them, culturally as well as physically. This concludes Chapter 4 of The Origins of Architecture, The First Walls. Thanks for listening. See you in the next episode.